Hello, welcome back to Boy with a Camera. My name is June. I'm a videographer of sorts, and today's video is about IBIS. More specifically, we're getting into kind of comparisons between different camera brands and different camera models and how they approach IBIS. What are the characteristics of a good IBIS system in a camera? And for me personally, I want to see how great or how bad the Fuji X-T4 IBIS is, and then I actually want to compare it to my handheld Pocket 4K rig. In my last video about Fujifilm lenses, I mentioned that I'm not completely sold on the Fuji X-T4's IBIS yet, and I hope that this video will help illustrate why I feel that way about the Fuji X-T4. So when we're asking ourselves the question, what makes IBIS good in a camera, I think a great place to start is to look at footage from a camera without IBIS. In our case, here is some footage from a Canon T4i with the Canon Nifty 50 50mm 1.8 shot back in like 2011 or 2012 or something like that.
지금 지석이는 같이 놀 친구가 없나 보다.
Obviously not the best footage or best video, it was just a joke video. But I think the major takeaways from looking at this footage is that we can begin to determine what the role of IBIS is, what it needs to correct. And of course, the main thing is getting rid of micro jitters. But the question is where? Where do we want those micro jitters gone? From what I see is predominantly shots that have simple movements or trying to keep the camera steady and still. So now we're beginning to define or understand the function of an IBIS system. It's a very similar thought process to figuring out the function of a tripod, a gimbal, a Steadicam, so on and so forth. Now, speaking of tripods and gimbals, essentially IBIS seems like it's trying to replace those two items. And I think that's a good standard or way to approach evaluating an IBIS system. Obviously, it's not likely that IBIS will ever completely replace those items, but I think the point of IBIS is to do a good enough job that doesn't warrant you having to take out that piece of gear. For example, if you're in a run and gun scenario and you just need some quick establishing shots, sometimes you just need locked off shots and just grab a wide, grab a tight, maybe a little bit of a pan, maybe a bit of tilt, and then go on and capture action. So this leads me to believe that the best type of IBIS system will be developed with a run and gun shooter in mind, who know how to use the gear and know the function of gear, but they don't have the luxury on a shoot day to carry around such gear and to set up such gear. But anyways, that's enough rambling, let's get into the sample footage. I would like to apologize up front for how bad some of these shots, if not most of them, are. A lot of them are from way back in the day when I was just beginning to learn video. Also, I was sourcing them through Google Drive file stream, and that's a very tedious and slow process, so I'm sure that there are better shots in the archives, but I thought this was a fair representation of what the IBIS systems of each could do. All of these files are straight from camera, no post-stabilization applied, and playing back in 24 FPS. I've also tried my best to list the lenses that I used for each shot, so if the lens has built-in stabilization, you'll know. Alright, so with the run and gun shooter in mind, I was thinking of the basic movements or the types of shots that they would regularly need IBIS to help with. The first one is holding the camera steady in lieu of a tripod. So those are shot with proper posture, elbows tucked in, I'm hoping 3 points of contact if possible, and just trying to get a still shot. I also want to show a couple of examples when you're in a moving vehicle. So here we have examples from a car. From the inside of a gondola. and on a boat. So you'll see that all of these systems, technically they're struggling in comparison to when they're not in a moving vehicle. Next, we're going to look at simple movements. These are types of movements that I intuitively think that an IBIS system can handle. Basically, any sort of movement that doesn't require you to take a step. You can stay where you are and just rock your hips, push in, lean back, panning left and right, tilting up and down. Things that I think don't give a lot of shake to the footage. Complex movements. So this is any type of movement that I think intuitively an IBIS system will struggle with. So in my head, that's anything that requires you to take a step or two or three, anything from low to high, a lot of movement in the camera, anything that compromises a very stable posture. And last, I just wanted to keep this separate from everything else, is the walking shot. that's the raw sample footage, but I think our evaluation of IBIS should not stop there. Because if we keep in mind the video production process, there's shooting, but then there's post-production as well. How do these files perform in the edit? So first we're going to take the same footage that we looked at, playing back at 24 FPS, and just apply warp stabilizer. Begin to see what is salvageable and what is not salvageable, especially in some of these more complex movements. Now, some of these shots were shot in 60 FPS. So seeing that it's a 24p timeline, I'm going to slow them down 40% and see if that smooths out some of these movements. Lastly, I'm going to combine the two. We're going to slow down the clips, then we're going to nest, and then we're going to apply warp stabilizer. So having gone through the footage, here are some of my thoughts and conclusions. major assumption and worry of mine, completely baseless probably, but I have seen some sample footage of the Canon R5 and R6, the Lumix X5 and the S1, and the Sony A7III, and of course my footage of the Fuji X-T4, and I'm worried that camera manufacturers are approaching IBIS in terms of strength. How strong can we make this system? I think that they're prioritizing that still shot of holding the camera still and getting a locked off shot. How can we make that the most stable thing? When we see sample footage of the Sony A7III, for example, there's that mode active stabilization. And I think with the Canons, you have that extra digital stabilization. And the function of each doesn't really perform well, from what I've seen, with complex movements. Perhaps with simple movements, they perform fine, and I know that for the still shots or locked off shots, they do very well. But that goes back to what I think is a good IBIS system, and a good IBIS system is just something that assists you enough to make your life easier, and is somewhat predictable, and can be perfected in post-production. So basically my worry is that it's kind of becoming like an unreliable feature of a camera. A lot of my Fuji X-T4 shots, for example, I wasn't sure if there was warping in the corners or not because the back of the screen on the Fuji is very small. So it's only when I get back to my computer and fire up Premiere Pro and begin to look at these files that I can see, oh, there was a lot of warping in that shot. I should have reshot that. Now effectively IBIS has become a liability and something that I'd rather not have. So rather than having a very light camera with a very strong IBIS system, I'm finding that a light camera with a weaker IBIS system or a very heavy handheld rig like my Pocket 4K will perform much better than some of these newer IBIS systems coming out. I'm beginning to be very worried about the trajectory and where IBIS is headed in these coming years. But these are definitely assumptions, and perhaps Fuji will fix it in a later firmware update, and maybe that these camera manufacturers, these newer cameras, perform fine with complex movements, but I haven't really seen any sample footage that suggests that. But I haven't used those cameras personally as well, so I can't really speak on it. These are just my thoughts and my worries and observations based on what I've seen. Anyways, hope that helps. I'm hoping that this helps you in your buying decision when it comes to a camera. If the difference between camera A and B is IBIS alone, really take a look at the IBIS system in camera B or A and see, is it actually useful to you or will it actually hinder you? Because if it actually hinders you, then perhaps it's better to go with the cheaper camera without IBIS, buy a lens that has stabilization in it, and if need be, to rig it out and make it heavier. Anyways, that's it for me. I'm June. This is Boy with a Camera. Like and subscribe and whatever if it helped. If you have ideas for future videos, please let me know in the comments down below. If there's criticisms or something wrong with this video or misinformation, please let me know as well. I'm just a regular dude and I'm learning as we go as well. And yeah, just be healthy, be well. Bye-bye.